Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving straight into the change behind horse travel. We're going to look at that exact pivotal moment when humanity hit a massive logistical bottleneck and how a completely radical technological disruption finally ended thousands of years of us relying on animal muscle. It is a crazy story of brilliant engineering, fierce public skepticism, and a literal shift in the physical boundaries of our world. So I want you to ask yourself, what if a 20-mile trip took all day? Seriously, imagine living in a world where the absolute top speed of your life was capped by the physical endurance of an animal. In our modern world, right, a 20-mile commute is an absolute afterthought. You just hop in and go. But before this technological leap, the economic cost of distance was just staggering. Every single journey you took was governed by these rigid physical limits. If it rained, muddy roads became completely impassable. Short trips were epic, exhausting, and incredibly costly journeys. The very idea of a machine carrying people and goods without an animal pulling it didn't just seem far off, it sounded like pure fantasy. Because for thousands of years, every journey depended on horses. And the sheer scale of that historical stagnation is kind of mind-blowing when you really think about it. The speed of commerce, the flow of information, the size of empires, all of it was strictly dictated by the stamina of a horse. Kings rode in elaborate but still horse-drawn carriages. Merchants moved goods with horses and oxen. Entire civilizations were connected by nothing more than animals pulling wooden wheels over really rough terrain. And get this, even as the Industrial Revolution was booming, transforming factories and laying down railroads across the country, everyday travel for the average person was still completely tethered to animal biology. But here's where it gets really fascinating, because this reliance created an absolute environmental and logistical nightmare as cities started to explode in size. We tend to romanticize the past as this pristine era, but urban centers were facing what was literally called the urban horse crisis. Imagine thousands upon thousands of horses jamming the streets of places like London or New York. The daily waste accumulation was off the charts. It piled up every single day, bringing rampant disease and this unbearable stench. Roads were crowded, dangerously dirty, and just incredibly difficult to navigate. And beyond the hygiene issues, the sheer tonnage of feed needed to sustain this workforce was economically crippling. There was a desperate global need for a totally new travel solution, because expanding cities just could not sustain the horse population required to keep them running. Which brings us to the giant steam misstep. Throughout the 18th and 19th centuries, inventors were frantically searching for a solution to this urban bottleneck. But what they actually came up with was a massive detour for everyday travel. They introduced steam-powered road vehicles. And look, while the engineering was certainly impressive for, say, a factory or a train, it was utterly impractical for your average city road. Just look at the contrast between what society was offered versus what society actually needed. Early steam vehicles were enormous, incredibly heavy, wildly expensive, and frankly, terrifying to the general public. In fact, they were so disruptive that some governments actually passed laws requiring a person to carry a red flag and physically walk ahead of the steam vehicle just to warn pedestrians it was coming. Just imagine needing a walking pedestrian escort just to drive down your street. No way that works for a quick trip to the market. Plus, the public was deeply resistant to the sweeping infrastructure changes these coal-burning behemoths demanded. So, it became super clear that steam was definitely not the practical, lightweight, accessible future of daily travel. Okay, fast forward to the 1870s and 1880s, and we finally see the internal combustion breakthrough. The engineering world basically realized steam was a total dead end for personal transport, and they shifted focus entirely. A completely different kind of engine was conceptualized, and engineers started fiercely competing to build a practical version of it. And to be clear, this wasn't just a minor upgrade. It was an entirely new paradigm of how to generate power. Let's break down what this actually means. An internal combustion engine is a machine that burns fuel directly inside metal cylinders. This is a huge departure from steam power, where you had to burn coal just to heat a massive boiler of water to create steam pressure. By burning the fuel internally, engineers could create a machine with an unbelievable power-to-weight ratio. It was drastically smaller, significantly lighter, and just far more efficient than anything that had ever come before. And that specific advantage, that was the exact technological key we needed to finally replace the horse. Now, among all the engineers chasing this new tech was a quiet German inventor with a very bold vision, Karl Benz. Unlike a lot of his competitors who were just looking for a quick, profitable fix, Benz took a radically different approach. He realized that you couldn't just take this cool new engine and strap it inside an old, heavy horse carriage. You can't just patch revolutionary technology onto an obsolete framework and expect it to change the world, right? So, Benz envisioned a unified machine. He decided to design an entirely new vehicle from the ground up. Every single component, the engine, the steering, the tubular steel frame, the transmission, the wheels, all of it had to be engineered to work together perfectly as one cohesive invention. It was a wildly ambitious goal. He wasn't just building a motor, he was literally trying to invent a completely new category of transportation that the world didn't even have a word for yet. And as with basically all great leaps in innovation, the resistance was fierce. People didn't just doubt him, they actively mocked the guy. Like the quote says, many people believed such a machine would never work. They laughed at the whole concept of a horseless carriage. Others legitimately feared it and called it a dangerous public menace. But Benz, he was completely undeterred. He saw this as a high-stakes gamble. Night after night, he's refining his sketches, testing engines, and pouring nearly everything he owned into the stream that the rest of the world had already written off as totally impossible. But all of that relentless dedication, all that financial and social risk, it finally paid off. By 1885, that impossible dream became a physical reality right there in his workshop. He had built the first true automobile. Let's take a closer look at the 1885 Patent-Motorwagen. It was this strange, delicate-looking vehicle, totally unlike anything anyone had ever seen. He completely ditched that bulky carriage aesthetic. It had 3 thin, wire-spoked wheels, kind of like a modern bicycle, actually. It featured a super lightweight steel frame, a single-cylinder gas engine mounted in the back, simple steering up front, and, most importantly, no horse. Just imagine how alien that silhouette would have looked to someone in 1885. A carriage moving all on its own, completely missing its living component. It was a million miles away from those terrifying steam carriages that needed a pedestrian escort. Less than one. What does that mean? It means this revolutionary, world-changing engine produced less than 1 horsepower. I mean, it is wonderfully ironic, isn't it? Today, your standard kitchen blender or toaster literally has more raw power than the incredible machine designed to replace the horse. But you know what? Despite that incredibly modest power output, this machine was one of the greatest engineering breakthroughs in human history. The age of the automobile had officially begun. For the very first time, we had a practical, lightweight vehicle that could transport people using only internal combustion. This was the definitive answer to the urban horse crisis. It was the absolute change behind horse travel. At the time, sitting in that small workshop in 1885, very few people realized it, but the mechanics of how humanity traveled, how we shipped goods, and how we'd eventually build our modern cities had just changed forever. Which leaves us with this final, massive hurdle. The invention was complete. The ground-up engineering was a total success. The machine actually worked. But building it was only half the battle. How do you take a society that has relied on animal muscle for thousands of years, a public that has literally laughed at your ideas and called them dangerous, and convince them to step onto a machine powered by controlled explosions? How do you convince a horse-drawn world that the future has finally arrived? That is the fascinating hurdle of public adoption. And it's the perfect question to leave you with today as we wrap up this explainer. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I'll see you in the next one.